back. Welcome to another edition of the Big News Roundup. I'm Bill Thomas, and here's what's happening right now. Ilhan Omar, she's at it again, this time complaining that her rude guest was roughed up and arrested by Capitol Police. Ted Cruz accuses Democrats of rooting against America. JD Vance announces the Trump administration is pausing Medicaid funds to fraud-plagued Minnesota. And President Trump, he fires back against crybaby Robert De Niro. All this and a bunch more is coming up right now on the Big Roundup. We have a great deal to get to today. Let's start right here. Congresswoman Ilhan Omar throwing yet another one of her famous tantrums after her personal guest at President Trump's recent State of the Union speech was forcibly removed from the Capitol chamber for bad behavior. Act like a fool, go to jail. In a long-winded rant, the Somalia-born lawmaker is now claiming that her guest, and I hope I get this name right, Ilhan Rahman, was completely manhandled by Capitol Police officers and eventually arrested simply because she had the audacity to stand up silently for a short chunk of time, and all while 47 was speaking. It's pretty basic. Sit down and be quiet. Additionally, Omar claims that despite being repeatedly warned about the visitor's injured shoulders, the cops were much too aggressive during their altercation until a Good Samaritan finally intervened to get her some much-needed medical attention. She goes on to say that eventually her pal was treated for her new injuries at a nearby hospital before she was later taken to Capitol Police Headquarters, HQ, and that's where she was charged with unlawful conduct and is now facing the possibility of, check this out, spending 6 months behind bars. Not exactly 15 to 20 doing hard time at Rikers, just a half a year in the local joint. In a jaw-dropping effort to blame someone else for the ruckus, pass the buck, Omar then concludes her hollow diatribe by pointing her finger directly at the Trump administration, saying that such a heavy-handed response to a peaceful guest sends what she calls a chilling message about the state of our entire democracy. And the Drama Queen of the Year award goes to Ilhan Omar. A brief applause right about now would be oh so grand. A little louder, and that'll do it. In case you're not aware, this is not the first time that Omar's guest, Miss Rahman, has had a run-in with federal authorities. Despite being both disabled and a U.S. citizen, she was physically dragged out of her car last month by immigration officers in Minneapolis and then taken into custody after reportedly ignoring repeated commands to move her vehicle away from the scene. Do the math. Sounds a bit like a repeat troublemaker to me. Now, while Rahman claims she was arrested this time for merely standing up as a form of protest during the president's speech, Capitol Police say they arrested her because she was disrupting the proceedings, demonstrating while Trump was talking, and repeatedly refusing to obey their orders to sit down. Now, for her part, Omar says she has no regrets at all about her outrageous behavior during the president's address. She says it was urgent for her terrorized constituents to see her standing up to the Trump administration. Well, no, it really wasn't. And that all of her screaming, yelling was unavoidable. No, it was entirely avoidable because she says she has to constantly remind people that ICE killed 2 American citizens in her hometown. Meanwhile, President Trump says that Omar's uncontrollable screaming during such an elegant event shows that she's a mentally deranged lunatic. I think the real term for that is MDL, a mentally deranged lunatic. I like that. Who should be institutionalized. Also accuses her of being stupid, a crooked and corrupt politician as well, and argues that it would be best for our country if we sent her back to where she came from and as rapidly as possible. You tell him, Chief. Final thoughts, and this is the News Roundup Lowdown. Here's the way it all pans out. When you take someone to a high-class eatery, the kind with maitre d's, fancy menus, and delicate aperitifs, you expect them to display at least a modicum of decorum. They should act and dress appropriately. No Bermuda shorts and flip-flops. And go easy on the cheap perfume. You know, the junk you buy by the gallon? In other words, the State of the Union address, a bit of a formal gathering. And Madam Omar brought as her special guest someone who is more well-suited to attend a bingo party in the rec room of a mobile home park in a rundown neighborhood. She was there simply to generate conflict. Now, bottom line, she was invited to listen to the President of the United States of America speak to Congress and the nation, and that is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Your News Roundup host, I've only been invited 8 or 9 times over the years. I'm always too busy to go. Anyway, she went and made a fool of herself. Instead of being grateful, respectful, patriotic, she chose to be a nuisance, and she did all she could to make sure that all the attention was on her and the one who brought her there. Editor Pranov the Magnificent, cut number 0, please. America, take a good look at her. The lovely and talented, rich and famous, conflict-creating troublemaker in charge. You know her well as my little bucket of sunshine, Ilhan Omar. The old one is trying to drag the country down, but at the end of the day, she's only embarrassing herself. Her party as well, and regardless of her disturbing and immature behavior, Tuesday night's State of the Union was legendary. Editor Pranav, I hate to put you out, I hate to bother you, but lay it on us just one more time. Cut number 18, please.
The state of our union is strong.
Indeed, it's very strong, and every day it's getting stronger and stronger. We'll stick with a bit of a related topic now and take a look at what one leading Republican has to say about the pitiful behavior of all congressional Democrats who attended the president's recent State of the Union address. In a scathing interview, Texas Senator Ted Cruz says that based on the way they acted during the president's speech, it's now apparent that the entire Democratic Party has completely lost their minds, that they're legitimately crazy to boot, and that right now they're so dead set in their stubborn ways that they're actively rooting against America rather than hoping our country will succeed. Furthermore, the three-term senator says that based on their infantile conduct, it's obvious the Democrats are currently so full of anger and rage that they can no longer behave like mature adults, instead preferring to heckle the president like a bunch of Marxist college students. Cruz points out that throughout his lengthy political career, he's been fortunate enough to attend more than a dozen State of the Union addresses, including a number delivered by former Democratic presidents Barack Obama and Joe Biden. Goes on to say that during those speeches, even though he's on the other side of the aisle, whenever they said anything that was good for America, he was more than willing to stand up and cheer. On the other hand, he says this current group of clownish Democrats remained sitting in complete stone-faced silence when lawmakers were asked by the president to stand up if they agree that their primary duty is to protect American citizens rather than illegal immigrants, in part because the administration's current success is counter to their narrative. Cruz says their unenthusiastic response clearly shows that when push comes to shove, Democrats showed their cards by revealing that they're really fighting on behalf of illegal aliens. Additionally, he says they're now truly become the party of murderers, gang members, and violent criminals because not only do they oppose deporting them, they don't want them arrested either. In the meantime, Democratic Senator, I like this guy, John Fetterman, also appalled by his own party's behavior, now denouncing all of the yelling, screaming, and sign-holding by his fellow Democrats during the event, saying that regardless of who's in power, it's vital for all lawmakers to respect the highest office in the land. That's just common sense, being a good American. Final thought, and this is the News Roundup Lowdown, and this is the bottom line. Whenever you hear Senator Ted Cruz or virtually anybody say that Democrats are rooting against America, listen carefully. Take it all in. Think long and hard about what they're saying, what he's saying. And tragically, his thoughts, they're absolutely irrefutable. Look at what happened during the Biden administration when they opened the borders to virtually anybody and everybody with a complete lack of regard to their key constitutional oath, which is to protect the border. By the way, and I know you know this, if you haven't got a border, you haven't got a country, and nothing would bring more joy to Democrats than open borders, which is the precursor to the destruction of our nation. You'll recall that under border czar Kamala Harris's watchful eye, illegal immigrants by the millions, they entered our country unvetted, unchecked, and many of them already had prior criminal convictions. Word on the street is that a number of those folks got tons of freebies from the federal government, and while it was free for them, it wasn't free for folks like you and I. Yeah, our tax dollars somehow landed in their laps. We ended up subsidizing a massive population of illegal immigrants, many of whom went on to commit additional crimes right here in their new illegally adopted home. What else are those dastardly Dems up to? I said dastardly, by the way, with a D. What are these dastardly Dems up to? Well, a bunch of blue states are redistricting, and all with the goal of manipulating the vote. Sanctuary cities, filthy, crime-riddled, and dystopian, and Democrats think this is absolutely delightful. Are Democrats rooting against America? Absolutely. And here's the deal. Midterm elections rapidly approaching. The future of our nation, it hinges on the outcome of those contests. And if you want law and order, safety and security, and the America which your parents and your grandparents fought so hard for, then you got to get out. You got to rock the vote and do your part to save our nation. All right, switching things up now, turning our attention to the latest fallout from the failed administration of this handsome character, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, and his state's massive multi-billion-dollar fraud schemes. Shortly after President Trump's announcement that he'll be spearheading our country's national war on fraud, Vice President JD Vance now says that the federal government temporarily pulling the plug on hundreds of millions of dollars. It's all worth Medicaid funding earmarked for Minnesota. And it's your fault, Toxic Timmy. Vance says the Trump administration is making the move in direct response to their significant concerns over the staggering welfare fraud scandal and its extremely poor handling by Team Wails. And that's a team you do not want to be a member of. Also says they're taking action to make sure that moving forward, the leaders of the North Star State begin to take their obligations to protect taxpayer money much more seriously. For his part, Medicaid chief Dr. Mehmet Oz also places the blame squarely on Wails and his cronies, saying Minnesota's problem is clearly with their leadership, along with these self-serving scoundrels who take advantage of the system to line their own pockets. And they're lining their pockets with 20s, 50s, hundies, and more. Additionally, Oz goes on to say that sooner or later, they're likely to give Minnesota the $260 million they're currently withholding, but that they're not going to release it until state officials in Minnesota take specific action regarding what he calls a comprehensive correction plan to fix the problem. Look at that, Dr. Oz with a fiscal RX. I kind of like that. As can be expected, Wails is condemning the move, saying that the temporary funding cuts will be absolutely devastating for veterans, families, and needy people all across his state. Well, wrong. $9 billion in fraud is the legit villain. You got that one all kinds of wrong and backwards. He also claims it has nothing to do with fraud at all, that it's simply part of Trump's campaign of retribution against his political enemies, and that the president is weaponizing the entire federal government to punish blue states like his own for standing up to the Trump administration's dreadful policies. This guy is so bent, he would even confuse Sigmund Freud. I wonder if that was a Freudian slip. Final thought, and this is the News Roundup Lowdown. Now, for folks who don't know, here's the skinny on Medicaid. It's a federal and state program that provides health care coverage to people who qualify. That's usually folks with limited financial resources. So, each state operates its own Medicaid program, but the grown-ups, the federal government has rules that all states are obliged to follow. Unfortunately, one particular state hasn't been following all the rules. And while I'm not legally allowed to mention the name of the state, I can tell you that it rhymes with Minnesota. And Pranab the Magnificent, a picture, if you would please, of that fine state. The state in question looks very much like that, and it's run by a guy who looks an awful lot like this. Now, maybe it's just me, but take a look at that face. He has a certain $9 billion look about him, doesn't he? Now, infer from all that information what you will, but in my mind, I've implicated absolutely nobody. Sometimes, to be honest, I think I'm the last innocent guy in this building. Now, in that state, Minnesota, which again I have not mentioned, the federal government provides at least half of the funding for their Medicaid requirements, so don't beat up on our country's fantabulous fraud czar, Vice President JD Vance, for watching the books. VP Vance, by the way, has a PhD in fraudology. Now, look, it's just some good old-fashioned common sense. Fiscal responsibility, nobody's getting harmed, and for now, only some of the funds are being temporarily held back. It's not that big of a deal. Pivoting now to yet another example of how communist China is actively trying to undermine the security of our nation, our homeland, at every possible turn. And a shocking development, an elite former U.S. Air Force combat pilot, he's just been arrested and charged with providing years of vital training to the Chinese military. According to security officials, for more than 2 decades, 65-year-old Gerald Eddie Brown Jr. served as one of our country's finest fighter pilots. Now, during that time, he was responsible for leading combat missions, delivering nuclear weapon systems, also serving as a pilot instructor for a number of critical fighter jets. He's a talented guy. However, the Justice Department is now accusing him of betraying our country by switching sides, compromising our military advantage and offering up his services to the other guy, the enemy, the Chinese Communist Party. The criminal complaint says that beginning in 2023, he negotiated a contract with a convicted Chinese spy to train military pilots for Communist China, and furthermore, that he repeatedly bragged about getting the opportunity to do so. I guess that's bragging rights. Meanwhile, the FBI warns the Chinese government is currently doing everything in their power to modernize their military, including by stealing our country's know-how, and that Brown's arrest serves notice that we'll stop at nothing to hold accountable anyone who collaborates with our adversaries. Now, a couple of additional headlines. We're also keeping a very close watch on here in the News Roundup newsroom. And first up, former Vice President Kamala Harris, cackling Kamala, railing against the Save America Act and claiming that requiring a person to show basic ID in order to vote is unrealistic because, in her estimation, nearly 40% of Americans do not either have a passport or a birth certificate. Well, look, if you got to show ID to buy a bottle of suds, you got to show ID, in my mind, to pick the next president. Moving along, after months awaiting, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton finally testified before the Congressional Oversight Committee as part of their investigation into the federal government's handling of the Jeffrey Epstein case. And that deposition taking place at her home in New York, and Clinton using the opportunity to deny ever meeting the convicted sex offender at all. Also in Washington, another major decision from the Supreme Court, which has just narrowly ruled that Americans do not have the right to sue the U.S. Postal Service, even when employees deliberately refuse to deliver their mail. Well, you can't sue the USPS. They're broke. They lose money every year, and they have for a long time. You want to go to court and pay your lawyer fees, what are you going to sue them for? At best, maybe a book of free stamps. And with that, a quick gander at a bit of showbiz news. And we'll kick things off today with a follow-up to a story we shared with you recently concerning a teary-eyed message from Hollywood legend, a legend in his own mind, Robert De Niro. Now, in case you missed it, Tinseltown's favorite aging bull appeared to be on the way to blubbering like a baby after calling President Trump a cruel sadist who's ruining our country. Well, as can be expected, 47 now fighting back, claiming that the two-time Oscar winner is nothing more than a sick and demented idiot with an IQ, an extremely low IQ, who has no idea what he's doing or saying, and who nearly broke down in tears like a child as well. Turns out there's a thing in life called fair play. I know you know Grandpa De Niro took his jabs at 47 on this program right here yesterday. And moments ago, before the program began, I received a call on this one, the hotline from the White House, indicating that President Trump wants a shot to retort. I simply said, Mr. President, I'd like to help you out and put you on the air. But honestly, this tired old man, Robert De Niro, who makes a living out of memorizing someone else's thoughts from a movie script and then pretending to be someone he'll never be, he's not really worth your time. He understood. He said thank you. It's fun to be an advisor to President Donald Trump. Skipping along now to some exciting news from the world of music. The legendary Rock and Roll Hall of Fame has just announced the nominations for their 2026 class. And the list, it's a humdinger. Among the 17 candidates looking to etch their names into the history books when the winners are revealed later this spring. Phil Collins, There's Something in the Air Tonight. Also, Black Crowes, a little band called Iron Maiden, which, by the way, producer Davey is a big fan of. Luther Vandross, and a whole bunch more. Congratulations and a hearty news roundup pat on the back, officially in order for all the erstwhile nominees. And they're all more than deserving of the big honor. A note, however, to the esteemed hall, and you left out a couple of notables who also belong in your fine little rock star club. You know, Boston is one of the greatest groups in the history of the universe. Please don't disregard the B-52s, Rock Lobster, Love Shack, and all the rest. Have a heart or a pancreas or a liver or a spleen. Have one of the organs. Give Weird Al his due, and he's more than worthy of being inducted or inducted into the hall. The weird one, he's one of the cool kids, and he deserves to be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Get it done. And with that, it's time to call it a wrap on the big news roundups. Have an awesome day today. Stay safe. If you haven't done so already, we tell you every day, it's right there. Hit that subscribe button. With that, we're going to dim the lights and fade to black, and we'll see you right back here next time for a brand new episode of the Big News Roundup.